other genres, and we had moments of Elizabethan music. I don't think the stuff we did was outstandingly wonderful. It was good, but was it great?
Few people have lived a love life quite like Mick Jagger. For decades, the Rolling Stones legend was linked to some of the world's most famous and beautiful women, leaving behind broken hearts, lasting friendships, and relationships that shaped his extraordinary life. But today, everything is different, and with clarity. So who is the woman Mick Jagger has chosen after a lifetime of unforgettable romances? And what makes this relationship unlike any that came before it? Join us as we uncover the extraordinary love story that Mick Jagger recently revealed. The pattern that started everything. Before Mick Jagger's relationships became tabloid obsession, and his love life grew almost as legendary as the Rolling Stones themselves, there was a period when everything still felt unwritten. Fame was arriving at breathtaking speed, bringing with it admiration, temptation, and opportunities that would change far more than his career. The women who entered his life during those early years didn't simply witness the birth of a rock legend. They helped shape the complicated romantic history that would follow him for decades. Mick Jagger was just an average kid who grew up in Dartford, Kent, England. That transition from just another boy happened in 1961 when he reunited with Keith Richards on a train platform, a chance encounter that led to the formation of the Rolling Stones. Together, they transformed popular music and built one of the most influential bands in history. But before worldwide fame turned every romance into front-page news, Mick was a young musician whose charisma and growing success were already beginning to reshape his personal life. His first serious girlfriend was Chrissy Shrimpton, sister of model Jean Shrimpton, who he dated from 1963 to 1966. The relationship overlapped with the early years of the Rolling Stones' fame and ended when Mick began seeing Marianne Faithfull, a 19-year-old singer and actress whose voice and image were already generating attention in the British music world. The transition from Chrissy to Marianne was not nice because Chrissy had found out through the tabloids. The cruelty of that discovery was something she described publicly in subsequent years as one of the more painful experiences of her life. Marianne Faithfull was different from anyone Mick had been with before. She was an artist in her own right, with a recording career and a stage presence that matched his own in a different register. She was also, during the years they were together, someone whose personal struggles were becoming as visible as her professional achievements. She descended into serious drug use during their relationship. She miscarried at 7 months while they were together, a loss that neither of them ever fully processed in the conventional sense. She survived an overdose in Australia in 1969 that brought her within reach of a very different outcome. Mick was not innocent in the difficulties of those years. He was simultaneously managing a global career and a personal life that was generating its own headlines, and the combination produced decisions that he wasn't proud of. After their relationship ended, Marianne went on to build a remarkable second chapter of her career that produced work she is now celebrated for. She died in January 2025, and Mick paid tribute to her publicly, saying she was so much a part of his life for so long, and that he had only love and respect for her. The women who came before Bianca established a pattern that the people who have written about Mick's personal life have identified repeatedly across 60 years. He is intensely attracted to strong, independent, artistically significant women. He struggles with monogamy in the conventional sense, and he is capable of genuine feeling that gets complicated by the specific reality of being Mick Jagger, which is a circumstance that would complicate most people's emotional lives. Now, here is the chapter that the tabloids loved more than almost any other: the marriage that gave Mick his only legal wife, and the divorce that gave him one of the more memorable exit lines in celebrity history. So what actually happened with Bianca? The two relationships that defined a generation. The relationship between Mick Jagger and Bianca Perez Mora Macias was one of the more visually spectacular pairings of the early 1970s and one of the more dramatically compressed marriages in rock history. They met at a party in Saint-Tropez in 1971 and got married in Saint-Tropez that same year, in a ceremony that became one of the most photographed events of the decade. Bianca was a Nicaraguan socialite and activist whose personal style and political consciousness gave the relationship a texture that Mick's previous romantic history had not contained. Their daughter Jade was born in 1971, the same year they married. The marriage lasted 7 years on paper, though both of them have described it as considerably shorter in terms of what it actually functioned as. When the divorce was finalized in 1978, Bianca reportedly said that she had lost her marriage on her wedding day, a line that has been quoted about the Mick-Bianca relationship ever since because it is both perfectly cutting and entirely plausible given what is documented about those years. Jerry Hall was the Texas model who came into Mick's life in the late 1970s and who stayed there through enormous difficulty and repeated betrayal for 23 years. They were not legally married until 1990, and that ceremony was conducted in Bali and was later declared not legally binding in a British court. They had 4 children together: Elizabeth, James, Georgia, and Gabriel. Jerry Hall was beautiful, warm, funny, and tolerant of things that most women in her position would not have tolerated, partly because she loved him and partly because the reality of being with Mick Jagger required a kind of accommodation that most relationships are not built to provide. The end of the Mick-Hall relationship came in 1999 when it was revealed that Mick had fathered a son named Lucas with Brazilian model Luciana Gimenez. Jerry announced the separation and the marriage was officially declared void. She later described the pain of the separation in interviews that were remarkably candid about what 23 years inside that relationship had actually contained. Between and alongside these major relationships, Mick had affairs that became public at various points, including an involvement with Carla Bruni before she married French President Nicolas Sarkozy. What came after Jerry Hall and after the affair with Luciana Gimenez was something different from everything that had preceded it. The relationship that would define the years between his late 50s and the mid-2000s was with a woman who was not a model or an actress or a socialite or an activist, but a fashion designer and stylist whose work had made her reputation entirely independent of the man she was with. So, who was Loren Scott? And what did losing her do to Mick in a way that nothing before had quite done? Loren Scott and the loss that changed everything. Loren Scott was 6 feet tall, impossibly elegant, and professionally accomplished in ways that stood entirely separate from her relationship with one of the most famous men in the world. She had built a fashion house whose clients included Nicole Kidman, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Demi Moore. She had a reputation in the fashion industry as a creative mind with an aesthetic vision that was genuinely her own. She was not primarily known as Mick Jagger's girlfriend. She was primarily known as Loren Scott. She and Mick had been together since 2001. For 13 years, they were one of the more stable and less publicly dramatic pairings in his romantic history, present at events together, photographed at shows and galas, described by people who knew them as genuinely well-matched and genuinely fond of each other. She was 17 years younger than him. She was, according to people who knew both of them, someone who understood the reality of being with Mick Jagger and who had made a conscious choice to be in that reality rather than being swept into it by circumstances she did not fully understand. On March 17, 2014, Loren Scott died in her Manhattan apartment at the age of 49 years. Mick was on Rolling Stones tour in Australia when he received the news. Her death was ruled a self-harm. He released a statement through a spokesperson saying he was in complete shock and devastated by the loss of his wife. He said he had to take a few days to come to terms with the agonizing loss of someone so dear to him and to pay tribute to her remarkable life. The tour was postponed. He flew from Australia to New York to be with her family and to manage the immediate aftermath of a loss that arrived without warning in the middle of a professional schedule. The grief of losing Loren Scott was something Mick has spoken about publicly with a restraint that shows both his general approach to emotional disclosure and the nature of what he was processing. In subsequent interviews, he has acknowledged the devastating impact of her death and described the period that followed as one of the hardest of his life. He has said that time heals things, but that some things are never fully resolved. The timing of how he met the woman who came after Loren is the part of this story that most coverage presents as either suspicious or surprising, because Melanie Hamrick came into his life in the same year that Loren Scott left it. So how exactly did they meet, and what happened in the months after? The Tokyo meeting. Melanie Hamrick was born in Stafford, Virginia, in 1987, which means she is 45 years younger than Mick Jagger, and was born in the same decade that the Rolling Stones began their Steel Wheels tour. She trained as a ballet dancer from childhood and eventually joined the American Ballet Theatre, where she worked as a soloist and later as a principal dancer until her retirement from performance in 2020. She met Mick Jagger in February 2014 in Tokyo, Japan. He was there with the Rolling Stones on tour. She was there with the American Ballet Theatre on a separate performance tour. They were introduced backstage, and the introduction led to a conversation that led to him inviting her to join him in Zurich 4 months later. The timeline matters because it places the beginning of their romantic connection in June 2014, approximately 3 months after Loren Scott's death in March of that year. Their son, Devereux Octavian Basil Jagger, was born in December 2016. He is Mick Jagger's 8th child and his first with Melanie Hamrick. Devereux has been described by his mother in interviews as having clearly inherited both parents' genetic gifts, with a talent for music and a love of dance that emerged early enough to be visible before he was old enough for formal training. She has described him as playing the ukulele and making up songs, and as someone who dances constantly without having been formally instructed to. The age gap between Mick and Melanie, 45 years, has been the subject of public commentary since their relationship became known. Hamrick addressed it directly in a September 2024 interview with The Times, saying she paid no attention to critics. She said she was happy. The people in her life were happy. She was not hurting anyone, and therefore people could mind their own business. Melanie's response was calm and direct. Rather than defending their relationship or trying to satisfy public curiosity, she answered the question and moved on. That has been her approach throughout years of public attention. She also made it clear that her life extended beyond her relationship with Mick Jagger. While the media often defined her through him, Melanie built a career of her own. She established herself as a choreographer and later became a novelist. Her first novel was described as erotic fiction inspired by Mick, and she released a second novel in 2024. Throughout it all, she focused on her own creative work, instead of building a public identity around being Mick's partner. The same approach carried over to their engagement. Although she confirmed it publicly in April 2025, the engagement had reportedly taken place 2 or 3 years earlier, and she had been wearing the ring since 2022. As for marriage, she said it might happen one day, or it might not. They were already happy with the life they had built together and saw no reason to change it. So, what exactly are they building together? And why does Mick Jagger describe the relationship with Melanie as the one that brings him the most joy? The wedding that may or may not happen. The engagement between Mick Jagger and Melanie Hamrick was one of those things that was simultaneously a total non-surprising and a genuine piece of celebrity news. Non-surprising because the ring had been visible for years, because sources close to both of them had been describing the relationship as deeply serious, and because the arrival of a child together in 2016 had made the partnership more structurally significant than Mick's previous relationships had been at comparable stages. Genuine news because neither of them had confirmed it until Melanie sat down with Paris Match in April 2025 and simply told the interviewer what was true. By early 2026, reports from sources close to Mick described a change in his position on the actual wedding. According to a National Enquirer insider, he had put the wedding off mainly out of fear, but that his relationship with Melanie was what brought him the most joy, and that he was desperate to find something happy to focus on after a difficult start to the year. The difficult start included the news that his granddaughter, Assisi Jackson's longtime partner, had been found dead. A family tragedy that had hit him hard, according to people close to him. The source also described Mick as finally ready to marry, saying he was keen to plan the wedding and that his relationship with Melanie was what he returns to when he wants to find something positive to anchor himself to amid difficulty. Most of what has been written about his personal life across 60 years emphasizes the drama, the affairs, the endings, the complicated timelines. This is something different. At the New York City Ballet 2025 Fall Fashion Gala at the David H. Koch Theater in October 2025, Mick and Melanie arrived together and posed for photographs. They were photographed with their arms around each other, with the ease of people who have been showing up together for years and have stopped thinking about whether the cameras are watching. Their son, Devereaux, who is now 9 years old, has been described by Melanie as someone who dances constantly and plays the ukulele and makes up songs. He has inherited what she describes as the gene from both parents. He has been on stage with both of them at various points, absorbing what it looks like to be comfortable in front of an audience from the two people who have spent their entire lives being exactly that. He is growing up inside a life that is extraordinary by any external measure, and that his parents appear to be managing with a deliberate commitment to his well-being and his privacy. Now, here is the question that everyone is asking. Is Melanie Hamrick really the only love of his life? The love of his life. The question of who was the love of his life is not one he has answered directly in those terms. He is not the kind of person who tends to organize his public statements around emotional declarations of that magnitude. What he has done instead, across various interviews spanning decades, is say things about the people he was with and about what those relationships contained. He paid tribute to Marianne Faithfull when she died in January 2025, saying she was so much a part of his life for so long and that he had only love and respect for her and her remarkable life and talent. That tribute, while warm, is the tribute of a man acknowledging someone who shaped his early adult life, rather than the tribute of someone describing the central love of their existence. The loss of Loren Scott was something he described as devastating and agonizing. 13 years is a significant chapter of any life. Her qualities, her independence, her creative success, her understanding of his world without being consumed by it, were things that matched well with where he was in his 60s. The grief of losing her was real and public, in a way that his previous romantic losses had not been, because she died rather than departed. What Melanie Hamrick represents in the current chapter is something that the sources close to him describe in a consistent way. She is described as what brings him the most joy. He is described as wanting to focus on what is positive, and his relationship with her is what he returns to for that focus. He is described as finally ready to marry her, after putting it off mainly out of fear. The fear is the interesting part of that sentence. What is the fear? Fear of loss, in a man who has lost Loren Scott in the most devastating way imaginable? Fear of commitment, in a man who managed to avoid legal marriage for most of 6 decades, despite being in relationships of enormous duration? Fear of change, in a man whose partner has explicitly described their current life as so happy she would be afraid to alter it? Probably all three simultaneously. He is 83 years old. He has seen what loss looks like. He has seen what the absence of commitment can produce. He has watched relationships that mattered to him end in ways that were painful and sometimes public and occasionally devastating. And he has arrived, through all of that, at a relationship with a 45 years younger woman who has her own career and her own identity. Do you think Melanie Hamrick is truly Mick Jagger's greatest love? Or was that title held by someone from an earlier chapter of his life? Share your answer in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.